Well, welcome back here. It is time to take another step on this journey through the feast with myself and Dawson. Tom Brooker joins me as well, and he is my companion for this journey. You might as well say that you're the driver.
I'm the driver, am I?
I'm the passenger seat here.
Glad you clarified that, thank you.
You're the expert, Tom. You are definitely the expert here. Strong relationship with Ebenezer and, of course, Red Hill Christian Centre director there and pastor, but a real love for the Jews and the land. How long ago did that start?
I'm probably a relative baby compared to many of the viewers and maybe even yourself. And my first trip to Israel was in 2011 with my wife. I went on a 2-week tour of the land, and God just broke my heart for the Jewish people. My eyes were opened to how the scripture should properly be read, just what was the truth of God outworking his prophecy in the here and now, understanding the aliyah and the return and restoration of the Jewish people.
The implications.
We are living in days when the greatest fulfillment of biblical prophecy is taking place before our eyes. And I'm not surprised that the world doesn't see it, but sadly still many in the church haven't woken up to that. And it's so important because it all paves the way for the return of the King.
And it's important to be taking this journey through the feast, because something that we've been saying, or I've been certainly saying regularly, I did get it from you, Tom, and that is, it's not just about having faith in Jesus, but it's about not losing the faith of Jesus. And I don't really think any of us want to do that. But sometimes it comes, just with a lot of presuppositions, a lot of filters over the lens of the Bible as we see it, as we read it. We don't realize that we're coming to it with a lot of assumptions. And hopefully during the course of this journey, we are going to be maybe breaking down a few of those assumptions and really look at the importance of why we remember what we remember. And we're moving on to Purim now. Now Purim, like Hanukkah, not part of the Moedim mentioned in Leviticus 23 in terms of, God's calendar, not our calendar, but an important event when it comes to, yet again, anti-Semitism, which we've seen of late has been so absolutely rife. Just remind us again about the two types of anti-Semitism, Tom, and then we'll start breaking down the whole Purim story.
Sure. Well, over the ages, this isn't something new, this is age-old issues. What we can see is that there have been two attempts, if you will, to deal with the Jewish people. One has been efforts to assimilate the Jewish people. So cause them to lose any Jewish identity, lose any Jewish practices, anything associated with the Torah, anything associated with worship of the God of Israel. Effectively make the Jewish people look like every other people on the face of the planet. So anti-Semitism through assimilation is the one. When it comes to Purim, we're looking at something different though, anti-Semitism by annihilation. And this is the type of thing where we've seen in World War II with the Nazi regime trying literally just to destroy all the Jewish people. And Purim is another classic example of how we've seen efforts to just wipe the Jewish people off the face of the planet.
Of course, we're talking about the Book of Esther and lots of really interesting facts about the Book of Esther, but that's where we read this account. So take us down that road again. Give us a reminder. Some of us, you might know a little bit, others more, but take us down the road of what actually happened at Purim and give us the backstory.
Okay, so our story takes place after the Babylonian exile, and we're in Persia. We're with the king with the unpronounceable name, King Xerxes or King Ahasuerus.
Yeah. I'm just going to stick with the king, by the way. Both of them are a challenge.
Absolutely. And so what we see is that there were a lot of Jews living under his rule in the land at the time. We have our heroes and our hero and our heroine, Mordecai and Esther, who are our main players in the account. And basically one of Ahasuerus's key men, a guy called Haman, he hates the Jews. There's an ancient hatred between his people and the Jewish people. And he takes his opportunity with his position of power to try and wipe the Jewish people off the map, so to speak, in terms of the kingdom that he's in. But little known to Haman, Esther, who has become a queen in the king's palace by this point in time. She is Jewish, and she uses her influence to speak into the king's ear.
But he doesn't know she's Jewish at this point.
He doesn't know she's Jewish. So the attempted annihilation of the Jewish people at the hands of the evil Haman are thwarted, and in actual fact what takes place is that on the day that the Jewish people are supposed to be wiped out, they are equipped to take up arms, and they actually kill those that were going to wipe them out. And Haman and his 10 sons are hanged on the gallows that Haman had originally intended to hang Mordecai and others on as well.
And there's lots of great books. There's films that have been made. One particular one that I liked, and we've already shown that on Revelation TV before. I've seen it a couple of times, and that is One Night with the King. And Omar Sharif's in that one as well. I can't remember off the top of my head the other actors, but it's a very good account. Obviously creative license, we know, but it is a very, very good account. It's not part of the Moedim, and unlike Hanukkah, we can say quite categorically, but Jesus was there in Jerusalem for the Feast of Dedication, because it says he was there for the Feast of Dedication, so that's obvious. We don't actually see that with Purim, but it's so important, and even in the book itself, it tells us we should never forget this.
Sure. So what we have to remember is that, like with Hanukkah, Purim, yes, you're right, it's not one of the appointed times listed in Leviticus 23, but it did take place several hundred years before Yeshua and his disciples walked in Jerusalem. Hanukkah and Purim, the events that surrounded both of those things, impacted the Jewish community quite significantly, impacted how they viewed Gentiles and how they set up boundaries in order to maintain Jewish identity whilst living in Gentile communities within the greater empires of the time. So whilst the New Testament doesn't give us a specific account of Yeshua and his disciples celebrating it, it's still something that was very much a part of their world. I think because as Christians, much of the time we see our identity as quite separate from the Jewish people, it's a normal question for Christians to go, well, that's Jewish, or that's not written in the New Testament, therefore it's not relevant to me. But actually, we only really ask that because we're so far removed from the first century.
How did
Jewish
we even
context
get to the point where that's a whole other discussion for another day, but it's like, how did we get to the point where we look at events and we go, no, but that's for them, this is for us. This great divide, this great divorce, as it were, in terms, but we all, we're all reading the same book. Okay, we have the New Testament as well. We've got the Gospels and the letters of Paul, etc. But how did we get to the point that we're like, well, no, we're something new, and that's all done away with? It's
a long, complicated history, and I don't think we've got the time for it all right now.
No, that's another subject.
But it's worth pointing out that Yeshua, Jesus, and all his disciples, they didn't have the New Testament. They didn't use the New Testament as their guide for how to live. Their Bible were the Hebrew Scriptures, the Tanakh, the Torah, the prophets, the writings. So within that, they also had the book of Esther. And within the book of Esther, it does state quite clearly that this is to be celebrated. A celebration should be held to remember the events of what took place in the book of Esther. And that this is something that should be celebrated, yes, by the Jewish people, also by the generations that followed them, because it's important to remember.
That was mentioned within the context of what Esther was saying there about anybody who joins us, to remember this as well. Well, is that not us? Have we not joined them? Are we not grafted in?
Yeah, I think certain translations use the term, all those allied with the Jewish people. Well, I don't know about you, Anne, but I do know actually. I consider myself grafted in to Israel, part of the Commonwealth of Israel.
Just on that, what do we actually mean? Because we hear that term, Commonwealth of Israel. What do we actually mean by that?
Well, this is a hotly debated subject, so I may not be able to give you a finite answer. My understanding of the Commonwealth of Israel is that we have the physical lineage of the Jewish people, the people of Israel. But the Commonwealth is a bigger definition. I think Paul was trying to explain to Gentiles how they fit into Israel without becoming Jewish themselves. So the Commonwealth of Israel, for me, is a common people who operate by the same constitution. When we look at Commonwealth of Israel in Ephesians, the word there is politia in the Greek, which implies a group of people united by a constitution. So the United States maybe is a good example of that. Which constitution unites the people of God? Yeah. The Word of God, the Torah, and all of the instructions, the commands, and everything else that go with that. So that's how I would understand it.
Interesting. There's lots of different routes to go down, and it's so tempting, and we're always kind of operating within the constraints of time. Just going back to Haman for a second, because his history, if things could have been potentially very different if history had done what God had wanted them to do.
Sure.
In terms of the Israelites.
Well, Haman shouldn't have existed.
Yeah.
And I think that's an important point to make. 1 Samuel 15, we get the account of Israel under King Saul being told to destroy the Amalekites, but they don't. King Agag of the Amalekites, his family are allowed to live. Various spoils are taken, which is against God's wishes. Now, Haman was an Agagite, so he was a distant relative of King Agag. Had Saul and the Israelites done what God told them to do, Haman shouldn't have existed. But generations later, after that disobedience, the fruit of that sin is Haman in a position of power in Persia, able to speak into the ear of a king and potentially wipe the Jewish people out through his influence there.
It's really interesting, actually, that I think there's certain, you could draw certain similarities even in modern times. It's like, well, do we really have to do this, or do we really have to follow what God is saying to the letter? But there are consequences for disobedience, but even within that disobedience, Tom, God is sovereign, and God made a way for the Jews to be saved. Probably one of the most, I was going to say misquoted, that's probably a bit unfair, but we all know the famous line of scripture when it's talking about Esther being born for such a time as this. And a lot of us have been maybe not taught, but we just kind of think, yeah, I'm born for such a time as this, and what's my calling? We were talking about this on the way here, and we take it as a very personal thing. But you and I aren't living in the times we're living in by accident. We were not born to the parents that we've been born to by accident. God has a big plan, and it isn't all about what house I want to live in or what job I want to do. It's part of his bigger, broader plan. And just think of the consequences if Esther hadn't complied there.
Quite. I mean, often we do tend to take, could it be that you have been born for such a time as this? And we think of that, don't we, in terms of our personal calling. And it's not that, of course, we don't have individual callings and we need to identify what those are with God, but the context of this had much bigger consequences. Esther put herself at great personal risk. She didn't know what Ahasuerus's response was going to be should she enter into his courts without permission.
Uninvited,
exactly. Yeah. And actually what she was doing is she was standing on behalf of the entire Jewish community, Jewish nation at that point in time, with influence into the king's ear in order to stop the annihilation of the Jewish people at that moment. So it had big consequences. We live in days where, sadly, that idea, the attempted annihilation of the Jewish people, is not far from our sight or our hearing. We do need to be asking the question, why has God caused me to be born in this generation, in this location? What is it that I should be doing to step up and support and defend my Jewish brothers and sisters, even at personal risk?
Yeah, I totally agree with you, and maybe this is something, I mean, you're watching Revelation TV, and it will be no secret that Revelation TV very much stands with Israel. And maybe you've been watching for many years, or maybe it's just been recently, but that in itself is not an accident. Us doing these programs is not an accident. You know, we were planning these programs, Tom, way before the events of October the 7th. We didn't know that everything was necessarily going to coincide. What I find interesting is that sometimes we might think, well, I don't really know what my calling is or whatever. You know, if you're sticking close to God and you are in relationship with Him, He will guide you. And the thing is, you might, okay, like Esther, she saw basically how far-flung the effects of her obedience to what was being suggested by Mordecai, how that manifested itself. We have no idea. We have no idea. Sometimes we might just be thinking, oh, you know, I'm going to do this job. And it might be something we think, oh, I don't know if I was called to do that. But you don't know the impact that you're going to have on other people. And you might not know the impact this side of eternity. It just so happened that she got to see it, even though God is never actually mentioned in the entire book.
Well, that's another interesting point. I mean, calling, we need to recognize that God has positioned us in order that we outwork His plan. Our calling is not simply God's plan for us to achieve success and health and wealth and all of the rest of it. One of the interesting facts you're pointing out is that within the book of Esther, God is not directly mentioned once. But that doesn't mean to say He's not there. In fact, what we see is a miraculous chain of, I'm going to say, coincidences that all pull together to achieve God's plans and purposes, i.e. that the Jewish people are not wiped out. And it's interesting because Esther 4:14, which we've mentioned, you know, could it be that you have been raised for such a time as this, is Mordecai's words into Esther's ears, because he goes on to say, you know, don't think that if you don't step forward, that you and your household will be safe. But rest assured, Esther, that deliverance, salvation even, will come from for the Jews from another source. Mordecai knows that God has promised to protect, to deliver the Jewish people. So whether that deliverance comes through Esther or not, it's going to come. So whilst God is not directly mentioned, it's assumed that God will deliver the Jewish people. It's one of the reasons why we can be positive, even in the aftermath of what's happened on October 7th and thereafter. We can be positive that we know that God's deliverance is assured in spite of what we see going on in the media and around the world. God has said, He may not have said it explicitly in the book of Esther, but He said it throughout the rest of the prophetic writings, that He will regather, restore, save, deliver, redeem Israel.
And they're not going anywhere.
They're not going anywhere. They haven't for the last 2,000 years. They're not about to go anywhere right now.
Which is amazing, praise God. Just moving on to what I think is an interesting factor as well. When the king, under the influence of Haman, had agreed that, you know, gone along with the plan about the destruction of the Jews, words matter, don't they? It can't be, you can't just go, oh, well, actually, a little bit like, you know, Jacob and Esau with Isaac. You can't go, oh, I got that wrong. Oh, well, never mind. It's not like that. Words matter. It's
a really uncomfortable truth, this, actually. You know, we're told to tame our tongues in the New Testament, aren't we? Yeah, so Ahasuerus makes this decree, and because it's the king's decree, it can't simply be taken back. If it could be taken back, then it implies actually that the king's words really don't carry any weight or authority in the first place. Exactly the same when we look at Jacob blessing Isaac blessing Jacob instead of Esau, rather.
And even though that was done through deceit.
Even though it's done through deceit. The point is that it's not Isaac's words, it's the fact that he's calling on God himself as the authority to do the blessing.
Right.
That's the issue here. God's word cannot return void, it says in Isaiah 55. It cannot return without accomplishing that for which it was sent. We need to be very careful how we speak, the vows that we make. Yeshua says, let your yes be yes and your no be no. We need to be very careful. And this example here with, with Ahasuerus not being able to revoke his own decree. He's the one who said it. He can't take it back. Yeah, it's a sobering thought.
It is a sobering thought. Now, in terms of how exactly in modern day, in modern times, Purim is celebrated, it's a favourite for a lot of people, not least the children.
Absolutely, yeah. So going way back, the encouragement in the book of Esther to celebrate, to remember, basically meant that Purim spiels, little retellings, acting out of the story would happen in the generations that followed. So people would dress up as Esther, as Mordecai, as Haman, boo.
Yeah.
And they would retell the story. Now, as the generations have gone on, they've expanded the wardrobe, so to speak. So rather than it just being those biblical characters, today in modern day Israel, you'll see kids dressed up as Transformers or Marvel superheroes or
It's just
so
an
on.
excuse to dress up.
It's just an excuse.
Dress.
But part of the celebration, whether you're dressed as Superman or whether you're dressed as Mordecai, is to retell the Esther story so that the generations don't forget. Because I think it's Winston Churchill once said, if we do not remember what's gone on previously, we're destined to repeat it.
Yeah.
We must remember.
Yeah, absolutely. And, just even thinking, lest we forget, the events of the Holocaust,
Exactly.
It would actually seem that a lot of people
Never
have
again.
forgotten.
Yeah,
Never
the
again.
same idea.
Yeah. A lot of people have forgotten. And because, you're looking at not that big an expanse of time, it's actually shocking. I think that you can have the events of the Holocaust survivors being part of those horrific attacks, who've lived through that, who remember that and are now going through that again. You wouldn't think that would be possible in the same person's lifetime.
You'd hope it wouldn't be possible, but sadly, evidence is that it is. And not just at Purim, not just at Hanukkah, which we've previously talked about, not just during World War II and the Holocaust, not just in the recent events since October the 7th. We've seen generation after generation anti-Semitism rise up. And anti-Semitism never goes away. It just goes under the surface. It becomes less socially acceptable. It never disappears until somehow it becomes more socially acceptable again, and when enough people sort of agree on the same thing, then they become much more brazen, as we see with protests on the streets, as we see with the October 7 attacks and so on.
And even the term anti-Semitism is relatively modern, isn't it? Because, beforehand, I can't remember where I heard it. It might have even been, I might have heard it from yourself, Tom, but I seem to remember round about either the First or Second World War, sometime around there, it was just called Jew hatred. And they decided to kind of, a similar word, but make it a little bit more antiseptic, kind of clean it up a little bit.
Sure. So, anti-Semitism was a term that was brought to the surface in order to try and, like you said, make it antiseptic, make it sound more tolerable, more acceptable. Sanitize it, yeah. But it's exactly the same thing. Like you say, Jew hatred, it's an age-old issue.
It is an age-old issue. But before we wrap up, because again, the time goes by so incredibly quickly, I do want to go back to the celebrations. Now, you were saying about however the kids dress up just now, we've still got Mordecai, he's a good guy, and we've got the bad guy. But the booing and the little noisemakers are more than just like if we go to a pantomime and somebody comes on the stage who clearly is the baddie and then all the kids boo them. There's actually quite a biblical reason for doing that, and it's about blotting out a name.
Absolutely. So Deuteronomy 25, I think it's verse 19, God says, you shall blot out the name of Amalek. Well, Haman, boo. Haman is obviously descendant of King Agag of the Amalekites. So in association with this, every time the story is told and the name of Haman is mentioned, it's traditional to have a grugger, which makes this sort of rattling, noising sound, and people boo and they hiss, so that the name of Haman is basically blotted out. Yeah.
You can't even hear it.
You can't hear it. Hopefully not, no.
Yeah, which is just, incredible. An amazing event, really, when you think about it. Esther being plucked from virtual obscurity, really, and then taken to the palace, and then becomes the chosen one of the king. Obviously, no idea what's ahead, no idea how important that she's going to be, and how important her decisions and her actions and her obedience, the knock-on effect that can have. I would like to bring that into like a personal thing with us. I think sometimes we think we live or we lead fairly insignificant lives. There's no such thing. You just don't know the impact that you could potentially be having, and you might never see it.
We have a choice to make, don't we? Every intersection in life, every conversation, everything that goes on, whether or not we're listening to the Lord's leading or not, listening to the Holy Spirit sort of guiding us in our hearts or not, we don't know the knock-on effects of every careless word spoken or every considered word spoken. We don't know if we'd not tried the door that was in front of us. We are not in control of the place, the timing of our birth. We're not in control of the opportunities and positions that God's put us in. But we do need to be asking Him at every step of the way, why, Lord? What is it that you want me to do for your kingdom, for your glory in this situation? We may never see the knock-on effect, but we do have a choice. We either pursue God's way or we pursue our way. Thankfully, Esther pursued God's way. And it's interesting to think that Esther and the Hanukkah account both occurred several hundred years before Yeshua's day. Had Esther not done what she'd done, had the Maccabees not been victorious in the Hanukkah account, Yeshua's generation would not have existed in the way that it did.
And I think it's really interesting, just in the final few seconds that we have, the whole point of it's not just about being called for such a time as this. It's because if you don't, God is sovereign and God will have His way. And I think that we can really take comfort in that. We need to pray. We need to stand with Israel. We need to be against antisemitism wherever we find it, and pray for the courage to stand up. You know, I'm not talking about getting a loudspeaker and going out on, speaker's corner or anything like that. But, just be ready when people ask, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? And having the courage and the boldness to speak out, because goodness knows, if ever they needed a voice, if ever they needed support, it's certainly in the times that we're living in. Tom, thank you very, very much. That was Purim. Our journey through the feast is going to continue when we visit Passover next time.